Yetis of light that licked across the event horizon of the black hole Persephone were the color of old blood under a welding torch, deep crimson scarred by white mull flares where ionized dust surrendered its electrons. Even after 6 years working the rim of the beast, Elara Wynn still felt her stomach float every time she looked into that abyss through the survey platform's forward blister. Persephone was nothing like the neat singularities in Academy diagrams. It breathed, it hunted, and now, tonight, it was going to fight at her side. She turned from the viewport to face the crowded bridge of the salvage tug Farside. Deck plates rattled with a vibration too low for hearing and too fast to be a tremor. The convoy's 3 remaining fusion plants were running at maximum thrust. Swass, horning juice into attitude rings that were never meant to spin this hard. Portable consoles were lashed to bulkheads with mining cable. Every status window bled red warnings, but the crew had stopped reading them hours ago. They knew what they were doing was madness, and they knew they had no choice. "Vector check," Elara said, raising her voice over the background thunder. "Give me the line on barge 4. Jay Kwan, her chief engineer, a square man with the calm eyes of someone who knew exactly how thin a wall of tungsten separated him from vacuum, glanced at the telemeter. "4's on schedule," he replied. 183 seconds to periapsis. Tidal shear just under the armor threshold. Any more, and she'll peel. "Peel a little," Elara told him. "We need the Delta V." G's thick eyebrows twitched. "Peel. Aye." The decision felt like signing an execution order, and in a sense it was. The armored barges the Terran miners had used for years to ferry magnetite ore from Persephone's polar ring were 30,000-ton bricks of honeycombed uranium. Their hulls could endure micrometeoroid storms and the occasional piracy raid, but they were never meant to graze a relativistic dance with a black hole. Still, the miners had learned early that Persephone could be bribed to share her leverage. If you dropped a barge on the right line of curvature, the tidal forces would whip it around the event horizon and fling it outward on a new trajectory at a significant fraction of light speed. For hauling raw mass, this was wasteful. But when the Combine siege group arrived without warning last month, waste became weapon. Elara opened a link to the comnet. "Ops, sound off." Across the jury-rigged channel, she heard voices call. "Gunnery, tracking, reactor, comms." Each was a miner in a stained exosuit, but tonight the titles were real. Their enemy would not parse the difference. Ole Tamber's voice came last. "Guidance, ready." The kid was 19, a cargo jockey from Ceres, and the best hand with a half-crippled guidance array. He was also sitting in the cockpit of Barge 4, strapped into the hardened cradle that replaced the ore deck's crane. That had been his idea. Remote piloting introduced lag this close to Persephone's gravity well, and Elara needed precision. "You still good in there, Ole?" she asked. A beat of silence came through. She imagined the barge whipping faster and faster on its lethal orbit, Persephone filling Ole's canopy like the iris of some infernal eye. "Good," he said, mostly bored. A laugh rippled around the bridge. Mostly bored. A laugh rippled around the bridge, too sharp to be truly amused. Humor forestalled fear. They all knew the plan's margins were razor-fine. 4 barges, each flung in sequence so that their relativistic mass would strike one of the Combine's Luthien-class siege cruisers as it braked into orbital artillery range. The trick was not merely hitting the cruisers, but doing so before the cruisers realized what the miners were aiming. The Combine doctrine assumed ragged little prospecting cooperatives would try to negotiate or flee. It did not expect them to weaponize celestial mechanics. Elara glanced back at the viewport. Space ahead shimmered with distant blue nav beacons, whose positions spelled out the edges of the miners' claim. Beyond them, less than an astronomical unit away, knifed the white hulls of the siege detachment. 12 cruisers, plus attendant destroyers and escort corvettes. Enough firepower to sterilize half a quadrant of the disk. They hung motionless from this distance, but Alara knew they were decelerating hard, readying their bombardment tubes. The Combine would slag the refinery habitats, seize the partially completed Dyson scoops, and then install their own garrison. The miners who survived would be forced into debt contracts. 6 years of peril and sweat and compromise erased in a single corporate line item. Not today, Alara promised the dark. Jay cleared his throat. 40 seconds. Course locked, Alara echoed. Alara walked to the nav tank. A pale thread traced the barge's trajectory, a tight blue arc hugging the innermost stable orbit before flaring outward toward the Combine formation. At the point of release, the path turned red. That red projected through the enemy fleet like a spear. All good plans had a cost. In this one, the cost was Ole's escape time. The barge possessed no thrusters capable of canceling the velocity Persephone would gift it, nor was there another vessel near enough to pluck him free before final impact. They had discussed remote signaling, co-pilots, even a sacrificial drone. None could guarantee the barge would maintain its vector through the precise micro-corridor needed to punch the cruisers before they activated point defense. In the end, Ole climbed into the barge without ceremony, dimples flashing under his helmet glass. "Somebody's got to steer," he had said. Alara thought of that now, the last flicker of a grin, and pushed the memory aside. Command sometimes meant placing a life on the scale. Tonight she had placed 20. 3, counting every miner who had volunteered to ride a barge. Ole was merely first. 10 seconds, Jay announced. The bridge quieted. The rumble of the reactors seemed to fade, or perhaps Alara's heart had started to hammer too loud for her ears to register anything else. 5. She opened the line. "Ole, here, Cap. If you get jitters, you tell me." "I won't get them." She forced a thin smile. "I know, but you can." A pause. "Cap, can you see them yet?" Alara glanced at the tactical overlay. The Combine cruisers were arranging into a bombardment lattice. "They're in position. Tell them to hold still. Will do." 2, Jay said. 1. The nav thread blinked crimson. Barge 4 had crossed the launching gate. "Release!" Alara cried. Instantly, the link filled with static squeals as gravitational flex and radiation tore at the comm channels. Through the noise, Alara heard him laugh. The wild, pruriginous laugh of a skydiver who had already stepped off the edge. "Trajectory nominal," tracking said. Their voice trembled, but the data was right. The barge shot outward like a bullet from a railgun, null thrusters firing microbursts to trim heading. Its speed climbed. 4C, .5, 6. It would reach .1C by the time it traversed the 60,000 kilometers to the Combine line. Within moments, the enemy noticed. Pinpoints on the holotank flared as the cruiser's sensors locked onto the unexpected contact. Several smaller icons pivoted, Corvette escorts burning hard to intercept. Alara's fingertips dug into the tank's edge. "Come on! Come on!" The first Corvette snapped toward the barge's projected path, venting plasma like a comet. But relative velocity was not something a small ship could cheat. The barge would cross their entire field of fire in milliseconds. They would need to place rounds into the corridor before the barge entered it, guessing vector precisely. It was a math problem even the Combine's hardened battle nets struggled to solve. At 50,000 kilometers, Alara's feed captured the Corvette, launching a spread of intercept drones. The drones arced out, spinning nets of magnetized durasteel meant to make an obstacle course. "Compensate," Alara whispered to no one. Ole compensated. The barge slewed a fraction. Bare metal groaned. Automated bracing pistons boomed. One drone clipped a corner, vaporizing on impact. The rest missed. 20,000 kilometers. Point defense cannons on the siege cruisers slewed. Targeting beams flashed. "Jay," Alara said low. "Any more we can give him?" "Cap, he's riding the edge of structural maximum." Jay's voice cracked. "We throw him more spin, the hull flakes." "We're not saving hull." The engineer stared at her. Then he turned to his console, muttering a prayer in Cantonese. A new cluster of red leaked across the system displays. Overloads in the barge's peripheral mass dampers. The hull would hold, maybe, but every seam would pop. Elara pictured Oli's harness bolts shearing, his body a projectile inside the projectile, but she said nothing. 10,000 kilometers. 9. 8. Suddenly the tackboard flashed amber, a torpedo, a real one, fusion-tipped, leapt from the belly of the lead siege cruiser, not aiming for the barge but behind it, timing a proximity wave to shove the barge off course. "Brace!" Elara hissed, though the miners were 200,000 kilometers away. The torpedo detonated. For a heartbeat, the barge disappeared inside the thermal bloom. Telemetry spiked to unreadable. Static, drowned comms. Ilara's knuckles whitened on the tank rim. Then the bloom cleared. The barge still flew. A blade of armor sheared, half its outer plates exfoliated, but the core mass intact. Olari's voice broke through, coughing smoke. "Still bored!" Cheers erupted. Elara allowed herself a single breath. 3,000 kilometers. Combined gunners switched to particle lances. No time for smart ordnance. Thin sapphire beams lashed. One grazed the barge's flank, turning alloy to plasma. A hair more and they would have cracked the midline. But the barge kept coming. And then numbers vanished, replaced by a single word on every slate. Impact. The holotank showed it in silence. The barge struck the first Luthian cruiser starboard of the main hangar, punching through 15 meters of metasteel as if shredding paper. A white nova of atmosphere, debris, and human forms vented. The cruiser twisted. Structural rings failed. The ship split lengthwise like a ripe fruit. Fire vomited out of both halves, quickly extinguished in vacuum. Everything went still. Elara exhaled. Around her, the bridge swelled with jubilant shouts, but she stared at the blip that marked Oli's suit transponder. It was gone. No surprise. At 10% light speed, relativity itself became a blade. Nothing survived that collision. She reached up and killed outbound audio. When the crew realized the channel had died, they fell quiet. She let the silence linger. "Reset," she said flatly. "Realign, Barge 2." The miners' victory cries curdled into a new, colder resolve. They still had 11 siege cruisers to break. Minutes later, Barge 2, with Yara Mencha at the helm, made its insertion. Barge 3 followed, and finally Barge 1, whose number had been kept out of sequence to masquerade as spare parts. Barges 2 and 3 found their marks. Each time a cruiser died, another ragged cheer flickered through the bridge, softer than before. By the time the fourth barge screamed across the deep and cored the Combine's flagship, no one on Farside made a sound. They were listening to the absences. One barge, one human heartbeat, one sliver of history, each obliterated in the same incandescent moment. A fifth cruiser fled, reactors overthrottled, past safety, and vanished behind Persephone's swollen disk. Two tried to regroup with their destroyer screen, but the screen had its own problems. Industrial lasers from the miners' orbital foundries swept the corvettes, slicing open hulls that had never been meant for such chopping blows. A half hour after Ollie's barge launched, the siege detachment was reduced to 3 cruisers, each wounded, engines flickering. They dumped heat in steady, panicked pulses, too afraid to spool FDL drives inside the well of the black hole, too slow now to outrun the miners' vengeance. "Captain," came a new voice over the net, crisp, patrician, wearing the faint rasp of someone unused to desperation. "This is Admiral Roxa of the Combine cruiser Stormfall. We request parley." Elara felt her jaw tighten. She toggled private comms. "Tracking. Give me their vector." "Maintaining minimum acceleration," tracking reported. "They're circling behind the disk. If they push injector burn inside this gravity, they risk dropout." "Exactly." Elara opened wide channel. "Admiral Roxaf, this is Captain Wind of the Persephone Miners Cooperative. You may speak." "Your tactics are innovative," the Admiral said. In the background, Elara could hear klaxons, the weeping hiss of atmosphere recyclers in shock shutdown. But further conflict is unnecessary. We will withdraw. There is no need for additional loss of life. Elara allowed herself a humorless smile. I estimate you have 3 operational rail cannons among your remaining ships. Am I correct? Silence. You know the cycle, she continued. You'll pull back, patch holes, and return with a second wave. We do not have a second set of barges. So answer me honestly. Will you sign a binding retreat accord witnessed by the Interstellar Guild, acknowledging Persephone as an independent territory? Static crackled. I cannot do that, Roxa admitted. It sounded bitter, as if she cursed the contract written into her blood by her parent corporation. And we are still at war. If you continue hostilities, Captain, the Combine will bring a fleet group, planet breakers. You cannot stand against that. I don't intend to. The next move is yours. She cut the line. The bridge air seemed to shiver. Jay gave her a haunted stare. We can't fight planet breakers, El. We won't. She stepped to the viewport. Far below, a filament of accretion gas tumbled into the black. Admiral Roxo forgot one variable, Persephone herself. The miners had always known their stay was temporary. The black hole paid in metals, energy, science, but only if you respected its cycles. A month ago, the astrophysics team warning flagged a massive infall wave scheduled to crest tonight, a roiling surge of magnetic flux and hot dust that would flare across Persephone's poles, like a solar storm in reverse. Any ship caught too near would find its electronics cooked, its hull lashed by relativistic grit. The miners had prepped safe harbors. Electromagnetic caves anchored to asteroid fragments inside the disk's lee. The Combine, arriving late, knew none of that. Elara keyed a channel. All stations, execute storm shelter. We burn in 5. Make sure our guests see the countdown. A flurry of alarms rang through the mining array. Dozens of small craft tugs, loaders, survey skiffs peeled off toward hidden cradles. Massive superconductive doors irised open in rock that only looked natural. Lights winked, strobing a warning across every band of the spectrum. On the tackboard, the 3 surviving cruisers hesitated. Elara could almost hear Roxa's analysts debating. Too many unknowns, too much damage. Finally, thruster signatures blossomed. The cruisers pivoted, chasing a vector that would skim them around the accretion disk and out of Persephone's gravity well, slow but steady, away from the impending storm. Let them run, Elara murmured. She waited until the Combine ships receded beyond immediate radar focus. Only then did she allow herself to sag against the bulkhead. Bodies moved around her, men and women she'd coaxed into soldiers. Some wept quietly. Some stared vacantly at the place in the holotank where red icons once burned. Jay stood beside her. You think they'll be back? Of course, Elara said. But not tomorrow. And when they come, the Guild will have had time to weigh penalties. Investors don't like lost battle groups. Cost calculus. He gave a shaky chuckle. We just taught a megacorp about cost calculus. Elara watched the screen dim as the last cruiser vanished behind a swirl of dust. Ollie taught them, she corrected. They held a brief vigil in the far side's mess. No speeches. Miners were not poets. They poured recycled water into tin mugs and raised them to the empty chairs of Ollie, Yara, and the others. They promised to carve names into the refinery's primary strut, a place shipwrights would see for centuries. Hours later, Elara floated alone in her cabin, lights low. Persephone's event horizon shimmered outside the small porthole, a curve so black it made blackness elsewhere seem gray. Somewhere inside that curve now orbited fragments of armored hull and stolen youth, bound forever in a gravitational waltz. Energy returned to origin. She remembered an early lesson from the academy. In a closed system, momentum is conserved. Today the miners had taken momentum itself and aimed it like a rifle. Physics had fired the bullet, but the trigger, that had been human. A chime sounded. Jay's voice came soft. "Captain, the storm's cresting. You'll want to see this." Elara pushed from the wall and drifted down the corridor to the main blister. Crew gathered there, helmets off, faces streaked with grease and exhaustion. Together they watched the poleward sky as the infell wave reached Persephone. Radiance bloomed across the silhouette of the black hole, auroras of purple and diamond spiraling inward. It looked, absurdly, like blossoming petals caught in a cosmic wind. The cruisers had long since vanished, but for a heartbeat Elara fancied she could see their retreating engines as pale sparks fleeing a flower's flame. A hush settled over the miners. No one spoke until the last ribbons of light folded beyond the horizon, surrendering to dark. Then Elara cleared her throat. "Back to work, everyone. The beast won't feed itself." Groans met her, half relieved, half incredulous, but the crew dispersed, spirits lifted by the ordinary. Jay lingered. "You really think there's more ore worth taking after all this?" "There's always more," she said, and her smile felt like the edge of polished steel. "And now, we're the only ones here to take it." He nodded, understanding. Survival was currency, and legend another kind of ore. Word of Persephone's miners slingshotting barges into siege cruisers would travel faster than any corporate courier. The next predator to circle this black hole would look long and hard before risking its throat. Elara remained at the window until the accretion glow dulled to embers. In the quiet, she let her mind replay the final telemetry from each barge. 4 arcs, 4 impacts, 4 brief transmissions white-hot with laughter and terror. She memorized them, carved them into bone. Then she turned away, already composing the next day's shift roster in her head. Persephone still breathed. So did the miners. That was story enough. For now.